Well, good morning, everybody. Absolutely thrilled to be here today. We just about managed. We'll get here in time, didn't we, people? We're an explosion of colour. We thought we'd bring it this morning. I'm thrilled to be here today. We wanted to take our inspiration from George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley with their ode to working-class young people, Wham, Bam, I Am a Man. And in this session, we're going to have one of the most important conversations that needs to be happening in the world today. And that question is, what does it mean to be male in modern times? And we would think that perhaps that being such a critical question, that we would have answers already. But is it really being grappled with or understood? We're not sure. Maybe an array of issues are calling this. Misinformation, inertia, fear of getting it wrong is definitely an issue. We all saw the global conversation that happened around cultural flashpoint adolescence. So much debate about how we can support young men and more broadly young people. And to tackle some really, really massive issues for them. The manosphere, toxic masculinity, a lost generation of young people, digital radicalization. In Channel 4's seminal recent research, Gen Z, Truth, Trust and Trends, it reports that in the last 3 years, there has been a threefold increase in the number of children being investigated by MI5. Just hold that thought for a moment. It's terrifying. And police in tandem have identified a pattern of young men becoming increasingly interested in brutality because of what they have seen online. So what, after everything has died down, remains? Where is the action and from who? Government? Educators? Tech giants? Educators, what about brands? Where are they? Are they leaning in? For sure, there are some brilliant organisations in this space. And to name just a couple, we know that the King's Trust, the NSPCC, are doing some brilliant work around online safety. And let's not forget, these Gen Zs are bloody brilliant. Their talent, creativity, and imagination is forcing us, with their demands for authenticity, to look at new approaches, multi-layered narratives and nuance. We need to understand them, understand the forces that are shaping them, to have any clue to know how to speak to them. And what that will enable us to do is to be able to explore today how we do reframe masculinity, to create new understanding and acceptance, to enable men to be allies both to themselves and to women, because this isn't about sides, it's about men and women coming together with reciprocity, openness and empathy. So joining me to have this existential conversation today, I have got two absolute rock stars with me. First up, we have Nishma Patel Robb, fellow Wackler, founder of the Glittersphere, helping women build influence everywhere, and ex-Google brand chief with a huge career behind her. And then we have the ultimate male ally here, sat alongside me, so much so that Lee Chambers founded his own company, Male Allies UK, and Lee is a prolific speaker and a UN Women Changemaker. So thank you both so much for joining me today. So let's kick off. And Lee, I'd like perhaps your response on this first off, if that's okay. So masculinity has perhaps never been as much in the public domain as what it is now. People are feeling worried and scared. In tandem, we're seeing all of this research about men in crisis. From your perspective, how big a problem do you think this is?
So I think if we look at it as a social challenge to step into, masculinity has always been in flux, but I think now the opportunity to look how it is defined for the future, it's a pivotal conversation that isn't always being had. I think if we think about the advances we've made socially over the past 50 years, quite often masculinity has been kind of pushed to the side a little bit in those conversations, hasn't been necessarily focused on. And if we think about, especially for young boys, who's marketing to them now? It's a very, very different marketing landscape than it was even 10 years ago. Apart from sneaker brands and gym wear, most young boys are being marketed to by a whole range of different influencers and influencers in a way that for me, when I was a boy, never seen before. So I do think the conversation is increasingly important because what we're getting is a lot of polarity. It's been very, very vital that women have made advances in a number of different areas, from rights to finances to opportunities. And that is something that does need to continue, given some of the gender gaps we still face as a society. We do need a conversation about where men are going to be purposeful. What does masculinity look like in the future? Because what we found in our research with young boys is, for those in secondary education, only 21% of boys have a clear vision of what masculinity is for the future. And that's impacting their vision and understanding of the man that they can be and want to become. So I think in many ways, this is an opportunity to start to redefine what that is, not to tell men what masculinity is, but to create spaces where they can find who they are and how they can bring themselves to the world.
Brilliant. And Nishma, what's your view?
So 2 critical data points for me. One data set, shall I say. One is I'm a mum to boy-girl twins. It's like my own little A/B test in life, see how that works out. And the other being that many of the women that I work with. And over the years, I suppose, as being someone who's championed gender equality and really focused on the progress and development of women. But I think when I look at it first, if I take my kids, I've got 16-year-old twins, and they both are severely impacted by what I see as a crisis for young boys. So whether it's my son, whether he's either conforming or not, he's not conforming to a lot of the more popular narrative, he would be bullied and attacked for that. And my daughter is a subject to what's happening. Interestingly, they both feel and think that we should be leaning in more to support young men.
Yeah.
And when I look at it from a workplace point of view and all the work that I do with young women and over the years with businesses and also as a marketing leader, thinking about where's the focus. You know, I've spent years and years with many people in this room trying to redress the way that women are portrayed in advertising. But actually, when I look at both sets of conversations, it comes back to the same thing, is what we've done very effectively, but still with a long way to go for women and young girls, we have left a vacuum for young boys. And that vacuum has been filled, as it always will be, but by negative voices. And unfortunately, the culture that we now live in, which is so divisive, the challenge to then lean into a narrative that kind of goes counter to what's deemed popular or more challenging makes it even harder. And so the kind of real life stories is, and it's really interesting because there's a real generational split here. I find women of my generation or women who've been working for quite a few years who will still staunchly believe and feel very painfully the challenge around the inequalities that they face. Whereas I find with younger women, earlier years in their career, and then younger girls like my daughter, feel way more passionately about going, we want balance. It's actually painful for us. If you don't support the boys as much, it's going to be pain for me. But I do think the one thing I want to be careful of is this is a pendulum swing. If we swung too far one way when we were supporting women in the way that we were, not that it's too far that we did too much, but was there balance? We've got to be careful we don't swing the other way. Because there is a danger at the moment. In adolescence, I completely hold up to the power of entertainment to shift and create attention. But it intentionally did not focus on the victim. And I think we have to be careful that you don't get a narrative that implies that girls are not still suffering significantly in the way that they are against kind of misogyny.
And I think one of the things that we also chatted about, and I know, Lee, you've got kind of a lot of knowledge of this space as well, I think is when we then start to layer in some of the other challenges for young people, because I know we've talked about NEETs and the fact there are nearly 1 million young people out of work, and it kind of touches on almost like the Channel 4 piece about this lost generation of young people. I mean, presumably those working class kids, those kids that are from care backgrounds, coming from really disadvantaged backgrounds, all of those issues that we've talked about become even more magnified, I guess, don't they?
Yeah, and I think sometimes we can look at this as a gendered conversation, and actually, when we strip it back, it's about fundamental social inequality. You know, the opportunities that young people have are simply not in the same range as we probably had generations before. The desire to do better than your parents or have more opportunity. But young people nowadays, if they've got a bank of mum and dad, that's a massive opportunity bonus. If they haven't, then their ability to take risks, have that safety net, and have increased opportunities is much, much lower. And they're looking at life thinking, you know, what are my chances? And I think that becomes quite an existential kind of conversation in young people's heads about what they can do for the future. Now, obviously, we as adults need to consider what it's like to be a young person today. That's quite hard, to be honest, because the world is so different and it's moving so quickly. And I see that in such a tangential way with the work that I do with men in the workplace versus the work that I do with boys in schools. It's so different, even down to our perceptions as adults of how children use AI. because we're using it to make work more efficient. We're using it to, shortcut lots of processes, save us time. They're using it to get support, find companionship, ask questions, try and learn, to get personal development. And with the current stuff that we've been looking at around AI girlfriends and companionship, that's a conversation that's increasingly coming into the world that we're working with boys. But interestingly, they've not got the real life experience to overlay to the online world. And 50% of the young boys that we spoke to said the online world is more rewarding, more engaging, and more interesting than the real world that they live in. And that's how they feel. But 63% of those boys said they feel that they spend too much time in front of a screen.
Yeah. We'll come on to talk about, I think, because I think there's also a big marketing piece, I think, in this as well, isn't there? And in fact, actually, let's talk about this now, because I think we talked about this when we were chatting ahead of this session about the role of brands and media and what role they can play. Because I think, as you've both touched on the fact that in the vacuum, really, of perhaps those more varied archetypes being played back to young men, that, there's a huge vacuum in that space at the moment. I mean, are there any kind of brands in this space, I guess, is one question. I think the other piece is, and again, kind of coming from a background of having spent a lot of my career marketing to young men, I think what adolescence showed us brilliantly was almost that it's, with the emojis and the code, almost it's so complex now. A broad brush approach to how we're going to market to these people. This is part of the reason why the terrible influencers have kind of stepped into the fray, because they're speaking in the language and through the kind of roots that the young people want to be engaged with. Do you have kind of, Nishma, maybe to bring your perspective in on the brand side of things? What could brands be doing?
Well, definitely. I think that, and actually this whole conversation highlights something really critical, is how much are we listening and really understanding people. I don't mean customers, because it still shocks me that some people are still planning and buying advertising or planning campaigns and insights of pretty old models. Socio-demographic groups or ages are not the way to do it. You've got to get in deeper. And I think paying attention to who is influential and what are the spaces. We've talked a lot about gaming being a really critical space of a way to engage young boys. But actually, when you look at advertising and marketing, it's interesting. It is a bit of the pendulum swing. And I think Getty Images did a really brilliant job of this recently. So they did a really great piece to demonstrate how the representation of women had changed over time. So you'd gone from the 1950s kind of housewife, we all remember the fairy liquid ads, through to, a process that, certainly became a little bit more sexualized, but also then into this real power woman and more a balanced representation. With men, it's actually gone the other way. You've gone from these kind of suited and booted, very stiff, male role models through to very sexualized images of a type. And it becomes less and less accessible for men to go, well, who do I relate to? Is it the footballers? And actually the reality is it's back to going, why do they connect so deeply with influencers? Because the influencers talk to them in a way that no brands are talking to them. They're touching on issues like loneliness, like that sense of, we joked about this, as saying, and there's a great study being done on this in Sweden at the moment of going, you just need to get boys and girls to spend time together, and actually probably men and women. That close proximity of going, I just want a girl to talk to me, is in some respects being picked up on by the influencers, as we know, very negatively, and in the minority positively. But there is a shift. And I think that's the really important point to look at as well now.
And I guess from your perspective, Lee, what kind of positive, and this is a broader conversation than marketing actually, what kind of positive initiatives could be being explored, are being explored? What are you kind of seeing from the work that you're doing? Obviously male role models, whether that be in the guise of influencers or something else, it seems to be kind of potentially a kind of key area. What's your kind of perspective on what are some of those kind of key levers that we can pull?
So I think there's a number of different things to cover on that. First of all, there's so much negative talk of online influencers and creators, when actually there are a lot of really positive examples within the creator community that are, showcasing what's possible for young people. And even sometimes when the messaging isn't as refined as we might want it to be, the aspects around having young boys think about what they can do in terms of, being entrepreneurial, keeping themselves in shape, having some discipline and some focus on the skills they can build. There's a lot there. And I think secondly to that, we need to also consider that we sometimes over-index on the online world. A lot of the young boys we speak to have role models in their own lives, proximity. They might be fathers, friends of the fathers, uncles, even male teachers, men in their own lives who they look up to and see themselves in. And I think we don't always consider the power of localized role models. I think from an online perspective, the landscape is so kind of diverse now in comparison to how it was, and there's so many influences that young boys can see. I think it's so important, as Nishma highlighted, we've done work in schools, we've had boys and girls, we've actually separated them out and asked them what they'd want from each other, brought them back together, and if I'm to give you a very top line what they wanted, the boys wanted the girls to listen to them, and the girls wanted the boys to talk to them. We just need to bring people together, and I think as adults, it's really important that we create that conduit for the younger generations to come together, to be able to have debates, to be able to have conversations, and realize that we're not always going to believe the same thing, we're not always going to agree, and we're not always going to be fundamentally aligned on our values, but that doesn't stop us respecting each other. And the reality is, if we think about the workplaces that we live in today, we work alongside people who are very different to us. As a species, that's our advantage. But people started to fear that. And obviously our work across allyship, the skills of that in the workplace, is about reducing some of that fear. Because at the minute, fear is the biggest barrier to men stepping into inclusive behaviours and challenging conversations. And we need to move beyond that fear.
And I think, I'm mindful that we've got 3 minutes left and this conversation has flown by. I think, Nishma, and to kind of almost be that antidote to fear, actually, and perhaps slightly more philosophically, what role do you think kind of hope, optimism, joy can kind of bring to this conversation?
Well, hugely so. So I think there's two things I'd focus on. One is we need more male role models like Ted Lasso, Ian Wright and others. It's not just about the young influencers. It's actually about the people that, dads, people at work, your leaders, etc., want to be. They're in the minority. Let's make them the majority. Because we know how it works. When they are the majority, you weaken and reduce into the minority those that are bad. At the moment, it's not that way. And the other thing is I want more women to stand alongside men and solve this problem. The more we can demonstrate balance and collaboration, I genuinely think that drives hope and optimism. And look, as a parent, as I say, of my 2 kids, they give me a lot of hope and optimism about the way that they see the world differently. And I think we have to lean into that and actually support them to achieve that.
Yeah. And Lee, anything from yourself?
Yeah, so we often talk, and me and Nishma talk about side by side. I think so much great things happen when men and women come together to co-design and co-create the future. Now, in some of the gender wars that are being stalked, we're getting to a point where I'm seeing people saying, oh, men don't need women, we can just get an AI girlfriend, and women saying, oh, I don't need men, I can financially support myself, I don't want to bring up a man-child and have another burden upon me. The truth is, we need each other. We need to be together. Humans are best when we're actually together. So let's think about how we actually have some of those productive conversations, not the us versus them, the conversations about we. And I think that's so important. We see it in young people, but we also see it in adults in the workplace, this kind of segregation. And if anything, the desire to split us doesn't allow us to look at the system that's actually the issue. Because it's not men and it's not women that are the problem. It's the system that we live within that's trying to separate us. When actually, we've always needed each other. And to this very day, we are best when we link arms and think about the collective change we can create together. And that is something that's never been more important.
So I think you will hopefully all agree. I think this has been quite an uplifting, really positive conversation. I think everyone leaves here today with a bit more hope and optimism. I think particularly for the marketers, I think, what a wonderful opportunity to help change the narrative, step into those spaces where maybe some of the influencers have kind of taken our roles, tell those different stories, celebrate men and women together. And I think by doing all of the things that my wonderful panelists have suggested, we can start to reframe masculinity in the really positive way that it deserves. So thank you very much for your time, everybody.